All right. So today we're going to look at Chapter 9, Lesson 3. Okay, and these were in pages 372 through 377. So this lesson deals specifically with biodiversity and extinction. So let's break these two words down. First off, biodiversity. So bio we know means life. Diversity, okay, differences. So here we're talking about different life forms or different species. Okay. Extinction, which most of you should know what extinction is. Okay. So when a species goes extinct, that means there is no more of those individuals that belong in that species. They are gone. They're not coming back. They're just gone forever, essentially. So starting on page 372, we're going to look at how new species form. Okay. So when a group of individuals remains isolated from the rest of its species for long enough, they start to evolve different traits, okay, like we talked about in lesson 2, okay, and eventually they become so different from the species that they branched off from that it prevents them from being able to reproduce and produce fertile young. We talked about this with the iguanas and, the marine iguanas of the Galapagos and the green iguanas of South America. They've been separated for so long that those Galapagos iguanas have evolved separate traits to where now they're so different that those two individual species, if they were to be introduced and mate, they would not be able to produce fertile young. Excuse me. So the example that your book gives are these two squirrels that live in northwestern Arizona. So you have the Kaibab squirrel and the Abert squirrel. And you can see on 373 the range of the Abert squirrel. It ranges all the way through Arizona into New Mexico up into Colorado. Okay? And the Kaibab squirrel is on the other side of the Grand Canyon, okay, and has a very, very small home range. So it's realistic to infer that over enough time, these two individual squirrels will develop traits very differently from each other and may eventually evolve into two separate species. It's very common that landforms create a barrier that prevents two species from interacting anymore. Again, we talked about the marine iguanas and the green iguanas. So two different subspecies of giraffe. So there's the common giraffe and the reticulated giraffe. So they both live in Kenya, but they're separated by the Tana River. So they are no longer coming in contact with anymore. They've been separated for so long that they are actually different subspecies of giraffe. I mentioned before that we are the only great ape capable of swimming. So chimpanzees and bonobos cannot swim, and they're separated by the Congo River, and they've actually developed into two separate species as well. Okay. Better example for us down here, the key deer, which live down in the southern Keys, Big Pine, and a little further south, and the North American whitetail. Because they have been separated by, obviously, the water in between the islands and then the mainland, they've actually developed into this smaller species of deer. So let's flip the page looking on 374 and the factors that affect biodiversity, or the number of species that can live in a given area. Okay, so again, there's your definition of biodiversity, the number of different species in a given location or habitat. So first is the area, the actual size of the area. Second is climate. Okay, and we're going to go through these individually. Third, genetic diversity. Okay, so actually the different forms of a gene within a specific species. And then finally, niche diversity. Okay, so these are the four factors that affect biodiversity. First off is the area. Okay, very simple. The larger the area, the more species it can support. Okay, so for example, TY Park supports a lot more species than my backyard. Okay, there's more space in TY Park. Okay, there's more resources, so it allows for a greater biodiversity. It allows for more species to call that habitat home. Okay, so the first one there would be area. Second, should also not be very difficult to understand, is climate. Okay, the warmer the area and the more rainfall it has, the more species call it home. So, for example, which of these two habitats would support more species? So the Mojave Desert or the Appalachian Forest? Obviously, the Appalachian Forest, a temperate climate, a lot of rainfall, as opposed to a very, very hot during the day. Deserts actually get very cold at night, okay, and very little rainfall. All right, so definitely the Appalachian Forest would support more species. The Everglades or Greenland. Okay, obviously the Everglades, again, subtropical climate, a lot of rainfall, as opposed to Greenland, a very, very cold, dry climate, very few trees. Cold climates typically have very few reptiles and amphibians. Okay, so again, the warmer climates that have a large amount of rainfall will have more biodiversity than extreme climates. So the third thing we're going to look at is genetic diversity. Okay, so this is the diversity within a species. So here we're talking about, if you remember back to our example with the baby sea turtles, okay, size. So some might be a little larger than others. Okay, coloration. Some might have a coloration that's better suited to a specific environment. Okay, some may be faster, more aggressive than others. Okay, so a diverse gene pool benefits that species. Okay, so in the event that there is some type of environmental change, okay, this genetic diversity ensures that some of the individuals will survive, okay, reproduce, and then pass on that particular, gene to their offspring. If every single organism was exactly the same, and let's say a specific insect, couldn't survive in temperatures below 60 degrees. Okay. And in a temperate region, it had a really cold, very, out of the blue cold snap for a few days. Okay. If there was no genetic diversity, every single individual in that species would perish. Okay. But because of this genetic diversity, some may be a little more resistant to the cold. Some may be a little more heat resistant. Like I said, differences within the individuals as far as size, color, speed, what have you. Okay, so genetic diversity is a good thing in nature. Okay, so again, we talked about with natural selection, the organisms that are better suited, or have the advantageous or beneficial traits are the ones that ended up surviving and reproducing and passing on those traits. And then finally, over on 375, we talk about the niche diversity. So a niche is the role an organism plays in its habitat, essentially how it makes its living. So every single organism has a niche or plays a key role in how a habitat, how healthy a habitat is. Okay, we've all talked about the food web before. If one piece of that food web is missing or something happen, it can throw the entire ecosystem out of whack. All right, because each one of these individual species has a niche or a role in that habitat. If I can find it, I'll try to send a link after I do this video. It was talking, I believe it's called The 15 Wolves of Yellowstone. Basically, it goes through how humans eradicated the wolves in Yellowstone, the impact that it had on the ecosystem as a whole, and then when the wolves were reintroduced, okay, it talks about just the cascade of changes that are seen for the positive in Yellowstone, okay, because these wolves were back in the habitat, performing their role or niche. Let me write a little note so I can try to remember to post that. Yellowstone. All right, so back to what we were talking about here. A coral reef. Okay, talk about area and the type of habitat. The coral reef supports many more species than, say, a seagrass bed or a shallow hard bottom or a sandbar. Okay, coral reefs are the second most diverse habitats on Earth, second only to the rainforest. And if you would just give a quick example, okay, as far as a couple of different organisms and their niche in the coral reef. Okay, so first you have the algae, okay, that feeds the coral. Okay, what's interesting? Okay, coral is actually part plant, part animal, and part rock. Okay, so the algae on the coral, okay, provides the food. Then we have the parrotfish, and there's several different species of parrotfish, but all these parrotfish feed on the algae that grows on the coral. Okay, without the parrotfish, algae would overrun the coral and choke it out. Okay, so the parrotfish do a specific job in keeping the algae under control. And then you have your predators on the reef, okay? Your reef sharks, your barracudas, your groupers, okay, that feed on the parrotfish. Okay, so this keeps the parrotfish in check from chewing up all the algae and destroying the entire reef. So all of these organisms have their own role or job within a specific habitat. So let's look at how species go extinct. For those of you who don't know what this is, this little guy is called a pika. Basically looks like a living teddy bear. And very, very cute little rodents. So again, like I talked about when I first started, extinction is when all members of a species disappear from the earth. So extinction usually occurs when a species is unable to adapt to changes in its environment. And we're going to get into different causes of this. But the pika is actually in critical danger right now. He lives way high up in the mountains, and he's not able to tolerate temperatures above 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. So scientists have noticed these pika have been going higher and higher into the mountains to escape the increase in temperature that we're seeing with global warming. The problem with this is the pika's food, okay, as it keeps going to higher and higher elevations, its food source, okay, does not live at these higher elevations where it's cooler. Okay, so the pika is actually in critical danger of becoming extinct because of this change in environment. And obviously, if there's individuals that are not able to adapt to this change, okay, then we could see this little guy completely disappear from Earth. So talking about a couple other terms, okay, so An endangered species is when a species is close to becoming extinct in the near future. Okay, I just took this clip. This is from the Everglades National Park website, and this is just a small piece of the birds that are either listed as endangered or threatened that call Everglades National Park home. So here you can see the scientific name, okay, the common name, and like I said, this is just the birds. And there's over 180 species of plant and animal that calls the park home that is either threatened or endangered. Okay, so here you can see the taxonomic group. I just happened to click the top part of it because this was, and this had all the birds. And then you can see the federal status here. The E indicates it is an endangered species. Okay, and threaten, here the T you can see that represents if the individual or the organism is a threatened species. And what it means to be classified as threatened is that the species is in danger of becoming endangered in the near future. Okay, so if we look at basically the the steps or the levels of these classifications, we have threatened, okay, and if they continue to lose individuals from that species, they can be classified as endangered. And it's not all doom and gloom. 20 years ago, the American alligator was an endangered species in Florida. It has now been removed from the endangered species. It's not even classified as threatened anymore. It basically has an established population now and is in good shape because of management, where there are enough of them now that the FWC, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, actually they issue hunting permits for alligators. So again, while hunting these animals led to them being placed on the endangered species list, management and habitat restoration brought them back very quickly. And now, to keep the population in check, they're issuing hunting licenses for these individual that particular species of American alligator. So things that can lead to a species going extinct. Talk about hunting and poaching. Poaching is illegal hunting. We think of poaching when we talk about elephants. They are killed for their elephants, and rhinoceros are actually killed for their ivory. One of the things that I usually talk about in class, and we won't see this in our lifetime, but it's very possible that this would happen, is obviously the elephants that are getting poached for their ivory are the ones with the large tusks. Okay, an elephant with no tusks is of no value to a poacher, so the hunters leave them alone. They don't obviously kill an elephant that doesn't have any tusks. So it's feasible to think that over time, again, we're talking, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ahead, it's feasible to think that elephants could evolve to not have tusks. Because if you think about it, the ones that are surviving and reproducing have that genetic code or the gene that codes for small tusks or no tusks at all. And those are the ones that are reproducing and passing on that trait to the next generation. So again, it's feasible to think that 100,000 years from now, elephants might not even have tusks. Pollution can lead to an extinction of species. Okay, destruction of a habitat, making it intolerable. A specific species can't adapt to the toxins in their habitat and completely die off. And loss of habitat is certainly a major influence. This one's very close to home here with the Florida panther. There's about 250 of those animals left in the wild. Okay? And they have a very, very small home range due to loss of habitat. We've basically taken their natural range and put housing developments on it. And they've been pushed. They basically have this little pocket of habitat over on the West Coast, okay, and that's where the majority of those individuals live, okay, whereas their original habitat was basically from South Lake Okeechobee all the way down to Florida Bay. So this has had a huge impact on the Florida panther. Hey, changing climate. I talked about this with the pika. Hey, increases in temperature can cause all kinds of problems. Can cause algae blooms. We see this with the red tides on the West Coast. So change in temperature can lead to the disappearance of a species. The elimination of a food source. We talk about every organism's niche or role in that particular habitat, okay? And the elimination of a food source can lead to the extinction of a species that relies on it. We think of overfishing, okay? This was common off the coast of England and Ireland, where overfishing was such a huge problem that they essentially lost all of their marine mammals. Okay? The seals and sea lions that used to feed on these fish, okay, basically went away. They weren't there. There's no food for them there. So that species basically was no longer prevalent in that area. Okay? And then finally, an introduction of an invasive species. So I didn't get into this a bunch, but on the Galapagos, okay, there are a bunch of feral goats that were introduced. And if you know anything about a goat, it will eat every piece of vegetation it comes across. Okay, the problem is the tortoises also feed on that vegetation. So if you think of a herd of goats feeding and this slow-moving giant tortoise trying to get something to eat, hey, it's being outcompeted by this invasive species. Fortunately, it's unfortunate for the individual goats, but very beneficial for the habitat. They basically eradicated all of these goats from a couple of the large islands, and they're seeing the vegetation come back, and the tortoises are starting to reproduce because there is now they have an abundance of their natural food, and they're not competing with an organism that doesn't belong. Okay? Obviously, invasive species very close to home here. Let me get rid of this. I'm not sure. Whoa, go back. We'll restart tonight. Try that. Sorry about that. So invasive species with the Burmese python, obviously does not belong here and is doing just terrible damage to the Everglades. I've seen reports where the small mammal population is been decreased by 99%. I camp there quite a bit. I cannot tell you the last time I've seen a possum or a raccoon or a rabbit down there. And these animals used to be all over the place before that Burmese python got into the ecosystem and started doing harm. It has no natural predators. Our native animals don't they don't know what that organism is. Okay? So they don't know how to avoid it, and it is doing a lot of damage to that ecosystem. So that was lesson 3. If you have any questions regarding lesson 3, post them in the thread, and I'll talk to you guys later. Hope everybody's doing well.